It is no surprise that President Biden and former President Trump won the Illinois primary. Now the battle begins for the White House. What will the next 8 months really look like? Illinois Congressman Darin LaHood joins us live from Washington, D.C. this morning. Thanks so much, Congressman, for joining us.
Great to be with you, Natalie.
Thank you. So what races in Illinois are Republicans watching closely in the general election?
Well, I think what we saw last night was Mike Bost in Southern Illinois had a great win in the primary there. He'll go on to continue to serve as chairman of the Veterans Committee and represent his district very well. I think we have an opportunity after the primary yesterday to pick up 2 or 3 seats. If you remember, Natalie, going back 5 or 6 years ago, we used to have 3 Republicans in the Chicago suburbs. So we're going to have some very good candidates moving into the election. And obviously, being a presidential election, we're going to have a spirited race between now and November. But I think Republicans on the issues are on the right side of the people, whether that's immigration, whether that's the economy, or the weak international leadership that President Biden has shown. I think we as Republicans, if we run on the issues, I think we can be very successful in November.
So former President Trump will more than likely be the Republican nominee. What do you tell voters who are concerned about his demeanor and the pending court cases?
Well, if you remember, those court cases have been going on for the last year, and President Trump won the primary. So voters had an opportunity over the last 6 months through the primary process to look at other candidates, whether that was Governor DeSantis or Mike Pence or Chris Christie or Nikki Haley. President Trump won overwhelmingly, even with those cases going on. I think also, I think most voters look at this as politically motivated cases, particularly the one in New York by a very Democrat attorney general and the one in Atlanta with a very partisan state's attorney. The other 2 federal cases, I think, are maybe more problematic, but obviously voters know about those and they chose President Trump. And I think the other point that I would make, Natalie, issues transcend these cases. It's an unmitigated disaster what's happened at the border. Towns across the country have turned into border towns. Chicago, for instance, is a border town now. Never thought that would happen. And so when people look at what President Trump did during his administration on illegal immigration, what he did on the economy, what he did in terms of international leadership across the world, I think they want to go back to that. And I think those issues will transcend these court cases, or, as you mentioned, his personality and some of the things that he said in the past. I think if President Trump acts more presidential and is disciplined and focused on the issues, I think we're going to do very well in November.
We'll see, because he is his own man. Very quickly, in the time we have left, can you give us a quick overview of what is at stake nationally in the House? What are the odds that Republicans will stay in control of the House?
Well, I think we will stay in control. We only have a 2-seat majority now, Natalie, and there's probably going to be about 40 to 50 seats across the country that will be competitive. And we've recruited very good candidates in those districts, and a lot of that will be tied to the presidential election. So we're going to have to work hard. We're going to have to raise the money. But I think where candidates focus on the issues, the #1 issue that I hear about, and the polling shows that, is illegal immigration. You know, I'll give you an example. In Illinois, you have Governor Pritzker wanting to spend $180 million of taxpayer money on illegal migrants. We can't even afford to help our veterans, our police officers, our firefighters. And when people hear about that, it's aggravating, and people are very concerned about that. Talk about that issue. Inflation. It costs more to do everything. Middle-class folks, lower middle-class folks feel like the American dream is slipping away under the Biden administration. And so talking about those core economic issues. And then lastly, when you look at our foreign adversaries, particularly the Communist Chinese Party, Iran, Russia, what they're doing, we need a strong leader there. Go back to what President Trump did when he was in office. Those are the issues that I think if candidates talk about that, we're going to do very well in November.
Congressman LaHood, thank you again for your time this morning.
Thank you, Natalie.
And good luck in Washington today.